To Rochester, New York now, and Gary Anderson. He's a retired Marine Corps colonel who's been a civilian advisor in Iraq and Afghanistan. Gary, let me just ask you about these numbers. Are you surprised?
I don't buy them. You know, I've been in 4 wars in the last 30 years, and in every one, when Western forces were allied against people that had other views and so forth, Western values were to value life and to value the sanctity of life. The other side generally believed that, quite frankly, that anybody that died in a war for their side died honorably and would go to heaven. The bottom line is that allowed them to fight amongst civilians, and if those civilians happen to be killed in the fighting, they could portray them as victims. Even if one of those civilians happened to be a fighter whose weapon was taken away from him. I don't buy that thing, and I don't buy the fact that CNN accepts those kinds of stories.
Well, these are reports from the United Nations. But to your point, let me just put a counter point of view out there. Patricia Grossman of Human Rights Watch had this to say. She says civilians are paying a terrible price as a result of these night raids and airstrikes, and those were designed to pressure the Taliban into negotiations. She also told the BBC that U.S. military officers aren't really doing an adequate investigation when it comes to this to understand where these airs are taking place. And that the Afghan forces are even worse. What would you say to her?
Yeah, where is the other side of the story? Where is the question being asked is, were these people actually placed in those kinds of situations beyond their desire to be there? And were they, in fact, victims of the other side rather than of the NATO actions and so forth? Those kind of questions aren't being asked.
Well, let me ask you this, Gary. President Ashraf Ghani's running mate narrowly escaped a bid to assassinate him this weekend, as I'm sure you're well aware. The election has been postponed twice. It's set for late September. Some are suggesting it should be postponed again because of concerns for voters and the candidates. What do you feel about that?
Quite frankly, Afghanistan is a divided nation. I would say that the majority of Afghans right now who live in urban areas and so forth would probably like to vote for democracy and to vote for the kind of system that would allow them to have some say. But there's a large part of that country that lives in the 14th century that's perfectly happy to live under Sharia law. And I think that if you had an election tomorrow, you would probably see a split along that line. And quite frankly, I'm very, very confident that if you had that type of election, you'd see that type of split. And perhaps that type of thing may be the type of approach that we need to have a peace negotiation. And we may have a one country, two systems approach for a while.
Well, speaking of the negotiations, as you know, they've been going on in Qatar between the United States and the Taliban. What do you think it's going to take to actually reach some sort of agreement?
Quite frankly, I think it's going to come to a point where they realize that they have a stalemate in that country. The Afghan government's not going to overrun those portions of the country that truly believe that Sharia law and the way the Taliban approach things is the way into the future. But on the other side of midnight, you have a lot of people who really, really believe that they want to be able to determine the way they live and so forth. I think at some point in time, we're going to see a situation where the country decides that maybe we have to have two approaches to the way Afghanistan goes forward.
Gary Anderson joining us from Rochester, New York. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.